Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's Michelle Falla. I'm here this morning with Donyale Hall. Very excited to be talking with Donyale this morning. She agreed to do like a virtual meet and greet. So we're just helping her out by saving some time and doing it virtually. She's busy right now, as you can imagine, as she's running for lieutenant governor. I've had a pleasure of talking with Donyale a couple of times and watching some of her online videos and getting to know her and getting to know what she's about and her platform and things like that. And this morning, she agreed to talk about something that's very dear and near to my heart. We're going to talk a little bit about the opioid crisis here in Delaware. But before we get started, before I ask you some questions about that and where you stand, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your platform is, who you are, first of all. She has some interesting facts about herself, and then a little bit maybe of your platform, and then we'll get into the other part.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me. I'm always excited to share who I am and what I stand for. Just a little background about me. I am a businesswoman. I am a wife. I am a mother of 10 beautiful children. I'm a veteran of the Air Force. I served in support of Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm in the early 90s. I have a master's degree in business with a concentration in finance. I've worked for the U.S. Department of Labor for Veterans Employment and Training Services for a number of years, where I got to see how the federal dollars come into the state of Delaware to service the outreach within the state. So I've had some working knowledge of how the federal government interacts with the state of Delaware in terms of budgeting. And I've also had some personal issues with the opioid epidemic. I have a younger brother who has suffered over the years with mental illness and addicted to drugs and homelessness. So it's something that's very near and dear to my heart as well. I've worked tirelessly to try and find resources within the state to be able to help individuals like my brother. And the system is just not designed in meaningful ways that help us address these issues. And so, when I'm elected, that's one of my top priorities, is to make sure, that we address these issues and make sure that resources get into the hands of the people who are working diligently to address, issues like opioids. My platform is relatively simple: effective government, making sure our tax dollars are spent wisely and go to programs that, we're talking about dealing with opioid addiction and issues. I believe in measurable outcomes and metrics and transparency in the spending. So I want to make sure that whoever is receiving those funding streams are accountable for the dollars that the state has allocated, and to make sure that those programs are efficient. The efficacy matters. So if we have money that's going toward programs that are not working, we either need to tweak them or get rid of them and start over from scratch. The second piece of my platform deals with education reform. I'd like to see our kids come out of our K through 12 education system career and college ready. And the last piece of my program deals with economic advancement opportunities, in particular as it applies to small businesses. We've seen an alarming amount of our small businesses close in this COVID environment. It's 37% that will never reopen their doors. So we need to really be diligent about creating an economic development plan that helps the infrastructure of our small businesses and creates opportunities for better jobs and job growth and quality jobs.
You're frozen a little bit. Let's see what's. Donyale, can you maybe, I don't know if you can hear me, but maybe you can log out and log back in. Oh.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. I don't know.
Where did I stop? Where did you lose me?
Yeah, so you're talking about the 37% of businesses that'll never reopen. You're talking about jobs and in this environment and things like that.
Okay, I just sent a request to Zoom to figure out what just happened.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, 30%, 37% of our businesses are closed permanently here. So we really need to make sure that we give the resources to our small businesses to create the infrastructure that we need to have quality jobs. Livable wages is always an issue. And so spending dollars wisely and supporting our small businesses is extremely important. I think there's a direct correlation between poverty and crime, and people who have, depression and lean toward addictive behaviors because of it. So, I think that is definitely a touch that needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
Someone is walking by. We
It's
have
fine.
morning Zoomers in my house, so remote learning is a thing.
That's okay. You're a mom of 10, so you probably got all kinds of
Yes,
things that your kids are doing in your house, right?
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so did you want to say anything else about your platform before I started
No, we
asking?
can go ahead and jump right on in.
Well, I did want to point out that you had mentioned before there are two constitutional duties of lieutenant governor. Could you quickly talk about those constitutional duties?
Well, the constitutional duties of the lieutenant governor are to preside over the Senate. So I get to make sure that things are in order in the Senate. And in the event there's a tie vote, then I get to cast a tie-breaking vote. The other responsibility is to chair the Board of Pardons. And I think that's a critical role because we have an enormous amount of recidivism rate in Delaware. And so, just being able to give those people who are successful in reestablishing themselves in positive ways in the community, that certainly merits and warrants a second chance. And the Board of Pardons is the entity that is allowed to be able to give that second chance. So that's a real important role.
And that's so interesting that you bring that up. And anything that helps an individual once they've done their time, so to speak, and come back out and become a productive citizen helps our whole state.
It does.
It helps that community that that person lives in, but in general, it helps our whole state. So it would behoove all of us to be rooting for something that lowers that rate and helps people with second chances and things like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So, okay, so that kind of then also leads into our opioid crisis because in the jails, we know that there are people who go to jail. I personally have a family member, my brother, who also struggles with addiction. And I know he's been in and out of jail numerous times. And I know there's some help there. I was able to connect with a nonprofit and who it's a Christian program, and he's a chaplain, and he's in ministry, doing ministry work in jail. But again, like what I saw was my brother would get out and he'd go right back to where he knew to go. And the reasons that he was in jail were like for theft and different things like that. I guess you would call those, kind of like your nonviolent kind of charges and things like that. So, but seeing that kind of, even in the opioid, like in rehabs and things like that, you go in and do the time, whatever, and then you come back out and you go back to your, the same people, places, and things. So there's a rate of relapse that's really high, I think, in Delaware. I don't have those metrics, but just from my brother's experience and watching that and people that we know. My husband's been in recovery a long time, and we've lost people due to the opioid crisis, to overdosing, to relapsing. Relapsing seems to be very huge part of the problem. So in the opioid crisis, because it's affected you personally, it's affected me personally through my family members and losing people. What kind of things would you change, or what would you like to see change? I'm a proponent of longer term care because it seems like 30 days for this type of thing is just not enough. It just doesn't seem to be working. So how do you feel about long term? And how do you also feel about faith-based long term?
Well, just to kind of circle back a little bit for my own personal, experience with this, my brother was like, did you say it was your brother?
Mm-hmm.
Similar situation where he had some petty theft crimes. You know, these are issues that are satellite of the addiction. You got to feed your addiction. So you see that that's what happens, is that you have those kinds of crimes happen. And to my knowledge, when they go through the court system, you know, there should be some diversion options in the legal system. I know my brother has some overlapping issues, so he has some mental health issues, and so for that reason, he could be diverted to a mental health court. If people are suffering from addiction, I think we should treat it, you know, relatively the same. They need therapy, not jail. They need to be in rehabilitative places and facilities. And so, you know, for that reason, when you speak about, you know, 30 days, it isn't adequate, I don't feel. And I think that the rate of relapse is increased because there are not enough wraparound services to support them, even if they go through a 30-day program. You know, what is the mentorship on the outside? What is the follow-up? What is, you know, if they're going back into the same environment that they come out of, certainly, you know, that increases the opportunity for relapse. So, you know, if we have these individuals and we have them in a therapeutic and a rehabilitative setting, being able to address the underlying issues of why they are, you know, in the position that they are is critical. So if you have people that lack job skills, for instance, let's find ways of giving job skills. Let's find ways of creating housing, you know, accessibility for people who have housing issues. There are just some very common sense things that we can do that will help reduce the relapse rate. But you know, there again, if you don't really understand the nature of the beast, you don't really look for the long-term solutions to those problems. And I'd like to see people get the care that they need when they need it for the length that they need it. So that's, you know, I'm not an expert in that by any stretch of the imagination. So I would tend to lean to, you know, the experts who deal with addiction and be able to craft some policy based on what, you know, the prevailing sentiment is about to treat those individuals and have them be less likely to relapse.
Okay, yeah, because I think we really need to look at the relapse rates. And certainly, if somebody commits a crime because they're trying to feed their addiction, if there's something they can do, maybe it's community service, or maybe there's other sentencing versus jail. Now, certainly, I'm not saying that there weren't times that, you know, sometimes, this is sad to say, but sometimes when my brother was in jail, I at least knew he was still alive. But, you know, there were certain things, you know, like I think he has DUIs and things like that. So the DUI, that kind of stuff, I do feel like, okay, if there's some type of jail sentence for it, but what are we doing in addition so the person doesn't come back out again and relapse and drink and drive again, and then, God forbid, kill someone that time or kill themselves or whatever. So there's so many layers to all this. That leads me to the next question. Would you be in favor, I have some things I want to look at here, would you be in favor of, because you can't make anyone go into rehabs unless, like, say, a judge kind of mandated that in lieu of the jail time, right? But if take the legal system out of it, say it's not a person that's in that yet, they don't have any charges yet or something, what about when they simply overdose, right? And they go to the hospital and then they're released. So it's not simple. I don't mean like overdosing is simple, but say they're in the hospital from an overdose. They don't have any charges and things like that, but then they just leave the hospital. What about a 3 to 5 day detox at every hospital in our state so that they are detoxed and then they're in a place where, you know, then they can be referred from the physician or the social worker to then go into a rehab, because they can't always get into a rehab unless they've detoxed first. And just to release them back out on the street from a hospital after an overdose doesn't make sense.
I understand what your point is. And I think when I hear you speak about it, I'm reminded of people who have suicide attempts, or I think that we treat people that come into the hospital and they are essentially a threat to themselves or someone else. There's a mandatory evaluation period, like in one of our mental health facilities. So perhaps maybe we could do something that would be similar with people who have overdose, and they present in the hospital. Certainly, if they have overdose, they are at least a harm to themselves, and depending on what the doctor decides, that could possibly lead to that 72-hour window. Like you said, that's pretty much the window that they give with people who are suicidal and present to the hospital. So I think that we could probably address that in very similar fashion and make that something that we could see as a treatment option from that perspective when they present at the emergency room as overdose. I think that's fair.
Good. Okay. All right. And then also another point that I have, I wanted to get your response on. How would you feel about a state mandated assessment for level of care at every facility to lower recidivism and get people the length of treatment they need?
I agree with that. I think that there should be an assessment tool that should be developed. I think the lack of having one doesn't really create a tier system of need. So I think that that's fair and that's appropriate to develop such a tool.
Okay, great. Okay, what about a comprehensive medical assisted treatment program reform in our state, in the whole entire state, with goals of abstinence and counseling?
I think, again, that's probably in the sphere of the wraparound services that I spoke of earlier. And I think that those are very necessary tools to help with dealing with this issue. And I think that that's appropriate as well.
Okay. All right, how would you feel about this one? You're a business person, a small business owner, and you're educated in business. And what do you think about this? A state mandate, and these aren't all my ideas. So these are things that I've talked to someone else in recovery about, but a state mandate that makes it mandatory for for-profit institutions to have a scholarship program and a community prevention program.
I'm not so sure that I think that there could be a requirement. I think that we could perhaps incentivize for-profit entities in ways that would create those opportunities, but I don't think that a mandate would necessarily be the appropriate way to go with that. I think we could, like I said, offer some, maybe some tax incentives or something that creates those kinds of opportunities. I know, as a business owner, it's tough to be able to just meet the demands of payroll at this point. So, if we're burdening businesses with that, I don't think that that's a fair measure.
Yeah, I would agree with you with that. On that, I think of some nonprofits that will have like their fundraisers and things like that, but they can also be on some businesses' radars for a place to donate. Like,
Right.
Sometimes they have these Amazon things where if you buy from Amazon, it'll go there. Or, businesses will encourage their employees to donate if they're looking for places to
Right.
donate. So programs like that could be in place to help with our state's opioid problem. Okay, and then the last point here I wanted to make was, or ask you how you felt about, how about a state grants for nonprofit long-term centers and transitional living, say over 90 days, for example?
Well, from my understanding, Delaware has received, some federal dollars that help with these types of programs. I'm not sure how much they've allocated. I've heard varying reports about, the money that has come in and how much has actually reached the intended recipient. And again, I'm a strong proponent and advocate for transparency in our spending. So I would like to know exactly how much those dollars are, and to ensure that, the programs like you're speaking of are properly funded with those funds. I think that, that's an appropriate measure to make sure that the resources are put in the hands of the people who were, cited to be able to administer those funds. So I'd be interested in seeing how that all is measured out.
Yeah, there's an interesting video going around right now, and I don't know all the details about it, but it's questioning how state money is being used for sober living houses. And um, a word has come to my mind that is, I think, a big deal, and that's accountability. How do we make sure where the money is going is being
Exactly.
used for what it's supposed to be used for? And when it's not being used appropriately, how do we take swift action? Because the time frame is so important in this whole thing,
I
in
agree.
addiction and mental health. And things can escalate, and things can turn quickly. So how do we get our politicians to be held accountable, and how do we get the state to move quickly on things before they get to a point where it looks like just things have really gone south?
I agree. So when I brought up my employment with the U.S. Department of Labor for Veterans Employment and Training System, we actually had a quarterly reporting system. And so every 90 days, you had a real-time view of how that program was performing. And if
Mm,
they didn't comply with the terms of the monies that were coming in, they lost their funding. And so I think if we start doing things and carry that approach with this particular space, that accountability would certainly be there, because you would be able to see real time, what's the outcome of the program and its efficiency. So if there are, misappropriations of the funding, they lose it.
mhm, mhm,
So,
mhm.
that's how we do that. We get some oversight in place that creates that accountability.
Mhm, 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 mhm. Yeah, I was on like an opioid. It was for faith-based people. I was on an opioid team, kind of like how can we identify these things that we need help in? Like how can we kind of cross our T's and dot our I's? Because in Delaware, it seems like there's things downstate, there's things in the county area up north, but we don't always know all the resources that are available in the state. So we were kind of, and this was in again, a faith-based forum, because we were asked by the Department of Public Health. There was supposed to be money there for the faith-based community to be able to come together and look for solutions that would help our churches, our congregations, our communities and things like that. And so we identified for about 2 years worth of meetings, we identified a lot of areas that are still needed, and things that we could kind of, if we could create like a universal system of everything that the state has, right? And from detox to self-help group, 12-step groups to church groups, or whatever faith you are. If your faith has some type of resource, or, a homeless closet that you're handing out clothes and food, like how do you feel like that's what our goal was, to come together and kind of just create something where we could all plug into, okay, I'm a Christian, I'd like to find more Christian faith-based solutions, or no, I'm not a Christian, but I want to, utilize this church because this church will give away, maybe a church would help with some type of rehab, like putting you on the right track to helping you get to that rehab, a car ride, or there's so many gaps and so many needs. My brother, thankfully, when he was homeless, he got into a program with Connections, and they helped him get an apartment. And that's been a wonderful thing. But if it wasn't for us driving him around looking at all these apartments, he had no license. He didn't have anything like that. So he wouldn't have been able to find the apartment.
Right.
And then submit it to Connections. So again, there's all these like little gaps and obstacles that for a person who's addicted to try to jump over those hoops, what would you say to that? I hope I'm explaining this correctly.
No, you're fine, and I'm smiling because I have had this problem as a private citizen for I don't even know how many years. It's a lot. In the business space, I made a very similar recommendation at a roundtable discussion that resources need to be in a central location within the state of Delaware's IT structure. So in an age of technology, most people will look on their phones and say, I need X, Y, and Z for A, B, and C. There's no reason at this juncture in time that we shouldn't be able to have a centrally located repository of resources for services like you are suggesting. Why can't we go to the state's website somewhere for mental health or addiction or whatever, and be able to see all of the services, the like services in the state of Delaware? Because I think that's the built-in frustration for most people, is accessing the resources. How do you know where they are if they're not centrally located? And then having them under a top-down strategy with that being in the state, you could actually see, people could rate the services. They could say, I had a great experience. They were knowledgeable, pointed me in the right direction, and I was able to get what I needed. Or you might find some to say they were not helpful at all, wouldn't recommend, couldn't find X, Y, and Z. There's so much benefit in having a very centrally located pool of resources. And that's something that I have been advocating for a long time, because the frustrations of people for any kind of programmatic need, you can't find it. 211 sometimes is helpful, but there again, you ought to be able to go online and find that. We shouldn't have to pick up a phone to 211 and speak to a live person. It should be accessible just from your devices.
Yeah, and I do know that Department of Public Health is working on that. They do have a good website that they're working on, and I haven't been to it lately, but Help is Here, if you've heard of that website. But it also seems like, in addition to having the website and central things and maybe apps and things like that, it seems like the person who's addicted also kind of needs a community advocate or a liaison, or someone who, not everyone who has addicted still has family members, because of whatever reasons. There's family dynamics, and not to blame family members, because it's very difficult. So there might not be a person there to drive that person around. Like I said, the Connections program was great for housing, but if it wasn't for my husband, and we had come to a certain place that, okay, my brother was sober for a while, we could drive him around. But if my brother wasn't sober, or if he was if he was under the influence of something, we wouldn't have been able to do that, as family members, because of those dynamics, those family dynamics and things like that. So it almost seems like there needs to be a position in the state or something like that for, like social workers, which they do make referrals. But again, there's still these areas that, I don't know, just seem to have gaps that, if he hadn't gotten into the apartment, he would have still been homeless. Now,
I've also found that agencies, their inability to interact because of, HIPAA laws and so forth, there seems to be that entities can't conversate with each other. And I don't know how we necessarily address that issue, but I think that that's where the gaps happen, because the agencies have no way of really effectively communicating. So I'd like to see, something happen so that agencies could have some overlapping interaction with each other to be able to bridge those gaps. I think that's probably the workable solution to some of that.
Okay, great. Well, Donyale, we've kind of reached our time limit. So I think we've had a good conversation. I like your ideas, and I look forward to hearing more of your platform. I would just suggest anybody watching this video, go check Donyale's website out. What's your website, Donyale?
Donyale for Delaware. It's my name. I know it's hard. DONYALE for FOR, Delaware spelled out.com. And you can also feel free to give me a call at 302-399-8838.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, thank you for spending time with me this morning. I hope you have a blessed day.
Thank you, honey. You too.
God bless you. Bye.